Well, that's me and my mother and Violet. La Villa, I don't remember the place.
There are.
That's my father's handwriting, by the way.
Oh, really?
He had beautiful handwriting.
Okay, we have a picture of 1927.
That's Violet.
What was it like for you being a big sister?
I carried a lot of burdens because my father passed away when I was 10 and a half years old, and my mother was alone. And she met my father when she was working. She never went to high school. She started to work when she finished elementary school. She came to this country. She was 5 years old. Her father had died. Her mother had died the year before. And her uncle, her brother Max, who was studying to become a doctor, he was the first one to come to the United States. A neighbor of theirs in the small town called Yashkovitz in Russia had a husband who had gone to the United States a couple of years before, and he finally had enough money to send for his wife and child. His child was the same age as I was.
As you or your mother?
No, the mother was the same age, the child was the same age I was. I was 5 and a half years old when I came.
You didn't come from Russia, your mother did.
Oh, it's my mother I'm talking about, forgive me. It was my mother. Anyway, he finally sent money for his wife to come, and the child had gotten very ill. They called it in later years diphtheria, and she died. So my uncle had several brothers still in Russia, and he wrote them, wired them or whatever, to pay the woman to bring me. And they offered her money, and she didn't want to bring me, but the money in those days was very skimpy. And so she finally agreed, but she said she would take me and put me on the boat, but she would have nothing to do with my mother. I say me, I'm talking as my mother. That she would have nothing to do with the child. So that poor child, 5 and a half years old, her brothers bought her boots because it was winter time. Told her never to take the boots off because they might be stolen. And 2.5 or 3 weeks it took to come to the United States, she never took the boots off. And that woman disappeared on the ship, in her room, wherever she was. And all the women took pity on that poor child, and they would give her what they had left over at the table. But that's how she came to the United States. And when she arrived, her brother met her at the dock, where the boat let them off, and she had to go through Ellis Island. And she came out, and he took her to some town in New York State where he was going to school, and I don't remember where the town was. And he had a room in a boarding house, and he only would move into a boarding house that had a child so that she would have somebody for some kind of companionship, because he was teaching Hebrew school to pay for his education in medical school. And what happened was that the mothers who had the children worked in the boarding houses, making beds, cleaning garbage, washing dishes, and my mother had to do that too. So he moved 3 or 4 times, and it was the same story. So finally he got an older sister, whose name was Ida, to move into a place that took single girls with my mother. And my mother was there for several years until Ida met a guy and got married, and she moved to Chicago because that's where he came from. And what happened to my mother she went to another sister, my cousin Rose's mother, whose name was Sophie. And she lived with Sophie for a while. Where she went after that, I don't know, because Sophie was a bride at that time and resented having to take care of a young child. That's as much as I know.
Now I have a picture, I think, of you, February 1924 in Lakewood on a pony.
My father used to send my mother and I to Lakewood every time I had a running nose, because I wasn't a sickly child. I was a very healthy child. But if my nose was running, we would go there because the air was supposed to be good, and it was known as a recuperation place, and there were gorgeous, gorgeous hotels there. So that's what this is.
Do you remember riding a pony?
Yeah, I became a rider later on.
And then, this is July 20th, 1925 in Manhattan Beach.
This is a young man. My father used to bring young salesmen out to Manhattan Beach, and he had a girlfriend, and she would stay someplace else, I don't know, but he would stay at our house. And his name, I think, was Lou. I'm not sure, I remember. And that's me, and that was Violet, outside our house, on the kitchen side of the house, not the ones that have the front porch. And the things I'm wearing, my father had a designer. He was in the dress business, and the designer used to make clothes for me. And these skirts were accordion pleated silk skirts.
These are wonderful little pictures.
They are. Here's another one, 1923, you with another little girl, it looks like.
This was Molly's niece. Molly was a single girlfriend of my mother's, and she had a niece, and we were the same age. And this was the original place we lived when we moved to Manhattan Beach when I was 5.5. There were bungalows that had been built by Joseph P. Day, who was a very rich man, built Manhattan Beach and so on and so forth, the beaches. And this was a colony of bungalows. And we had a corner apartment, and we went there when the doctor said I needed the seashore when I had the whooping cough, a year before this, I think, or so, maybe 2 years. And Molly used to bring her niece in the summer to go to the beach. And this was on Oriental Boulevard, where we lived before we bought the house.
And this one says July 1st, 1929, Manhattan Beach. Here's the handsome young man, I think.
Yeah, that's Roy. That's on the beach, Brighton Beach. And he was my favorite child because my mother had delivered him at home on a Sunday night, and the obstetrician was called to the house. He had been at a wedding. A niece of his had gotten married, and he'd had quite a few drinks. And when my mother delivered, she was badly torn and hemorrhaging. And my father, my sister and I had the bedroom next to my parents in the house in Manhattan Beach. And my father came in to take my pillow, and he woke me up. And I said, "Where's my pillow?" And he said, "Mommy needs your pillow. You're going to have a new baby, and it's going to be yours in a little while. And as soon as the baby is born, you're going to see it." So I gave up my pillow, and when the baby was born, there was a nurse there, and I was called into the room, and I was there when she bathed the baby right after he was born. My sister at that time was a very sickly child. She had the croup, she had the eczema in every joint of her body. She was constantly being salved and wrapped up in bandages. So we had somebody taking care of her, and this was a nurse for the new baby, and my mother was hemorrhaging. So I came in and helped the nurse bathe him. And when he came out of there, she handed him to me, and she said, "He's your baby." And I still cry when I think. It was such a joyous time.
Thank you.
So he became my baby. And I fed him. He was a terrible eater. He used to throw up. He would refuse food. And with the problems with my sister, and my mother was in bed for a long time with the hemorrhaging bit. But when I fed him, he ate. And that very first summer, my father sent me to camp because the house was pretty busy. And one of his associates in the dress business, and my father was the president of Dress Manufacturers Association at that point, and somebody he was quite friendly with, their daughter, who was older than I, was going to a camp in the Adirondacks called Camp Deer Trail. And so they decided to send me, it would be a good idea. So he packed me up, and I went off to camp, and we rode in the train overnight. And the camp had its own railroad station right between the lake and the camp itself. And the boys' camp was on the level with the lake. The girls' camp was way up on a hill, completely surrounded by trees, so that nobody could see the girls' camp. But we did the activities together in the social hall and so on. Anyway, to make a long story short, visiting day was after a month, and my father came up, and I packed my clothes. He and two counselors kept unpacking and trying to talk me into staying, and I wouldn't stay. So we went home at like 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, and he brought me into the house, and everybody was asleep. So he took me into my room and said, "Go to sleep, and when you wake up, you'll see your new baby." When I woke up in the morning, whatever time that was, I went in to see the new baby, and he was in his crib. He had never smiled, and he didn't like people to pick him up. When I walked into the room, his arms went up high in the sky, and he smiled. And I took care of him. He ate for me, and I put him to sleep, and I walked him, and I changed his diapers. He was my baby. I don't know why I'm crying. It was such a joyous time.
Precious memories.
Yes. And it wasn't long thereafter that my father died. 2 years. And that was the end of our good times. But he was always my favorite. When I used to go to play, I'd take him with me. Well, first in the carriage, and then when he was out of the carriage, I took him every place. I wonder if he remembers.
Should we take a 2-minute break?
Sure.
Dad says 8 years. I think
Could
it's...
you ask the question again? It wasn't on tape.
When did you move to Florida?
I don't remember the year. 7 or 7.5 years ago. And before we came, I had been very sick, and the doctor said I couldn't stay in the cold weather. So that's when Dad decided. And we had bought the apartment we are now in as a vacation spot. So the place was available. And I used to play bridge occasionally with a young woman. I don't even remember her name because it was very occasionally. But when she heard we were going to Florida, she says, "Oh, I have an aunt there. She's been there quite a while." And she called the aunt, and the aunt was a bridge player. That's why she mentioned her. She called her aunt, whose name was Nettie, to tell her that we were coming down and we were bridge players. And when we came down, she gave me the number, and I don't remember whether she called me or I called her. But she arranged, and we played bridge. And it was a very comfortable time. She had a second husband, but she was a lovely bridge player. And she got a group together. We were 4 couples that started to play together every week. And we would not just play together, we would go out to different places for dinner. And then we went to other plays and different things that were available to us in Coconut Grove in Winmore. And then she got another couple because we would go on vacation and so on and so forth. Well, unfortunately, your father didn't like the other woman, so we stopped playing with them. But we were, to start off with, 5 couples. Of the 5 couples, as I know now, it's Daddy and I. There was another woman there. I haven't seen her in quite a while, and she was older than we were. So I don't know whether she's still there, because I used to see her very often, or whether she has passed on, but all the others are gone. And that's been happening regularly, because in a place like Winmore, mostly older people, and time takes its toll. So we have lost a lot of people that we were quite friendly with beforehand.
Earlier we were talking about when Roy was a child and you were
Yeah.
taking care of him, so maybe